You may be wondering why I've brought the mighty Stormbreaker here for a Transformers top list. Well, the answer is simple. I received it as a Christmas present and think it particularly cool. Top 10 countdown. So, what made my criteria for picking out these figures? There's no democratic or duly elected process involved here. These are the 10 figures that I, the Ham-Man, thought were the coolest of this year. My criteria for who made this list was pretty simple. So these are figures that, even after getting them, doing the review, like, you know, anyone locked into a crazy collection will know. You get it, you love it, the hunt is almost half the fun, that's cool, you go there, I feel like a little piece of my soul has just been completed. But then there's those other figures that it's like, oh, that's great, there you go, you're in the display. Actually, you can come back with me for a little bit, let's go watch some TV. Now, this spot is a relatively late addition to the year. I think he was supposed to come out a little earlier, but I think we've all had to be pretty forgiving and understanding when it comes to release dates and delivery dates and things, am I right? We have Gigawatt. Gigawatt? Giga. I like Giga. What gets him on the list? I'll tell you. The fact that I think the existence of this guy in the first place is just so improbable that it makes him special by the very nature of his uniqueness. Right? Like, this is a particularly memorable figure, especially if you're a fan of those movies, which I think, who isn't? If I had to change something, if I could, it would probably be, I would love it if this chest could just get the tiniest bit more tapered. Just a little bit, just petite. Right? What I love about him, I love the Mr. Fusion gun, I love the flux capacitor with the dates, I love the stainless steel finish. His vehicle mode is clearly where most of the decal and time and efforts have gone, and that's completely fine because with these like Transformers X20 releases, it's really the vehicle mode that you're coming for, right? And it's like, well, why wouldn't you just get, like, you know, one of those cool hobby car versions? Because no one cares, because this one transforms. That makes it cooler than most things. In 9th place this year, we have a figure that I think a lot of people's collections have been craving and just been calling out for because they've been incredibly underrepresented in the toy line for how heavily they've been seen in the fiction. I'm pretty sure you can guess who I'm talking about here. The Quintesson Judge. She loves me not. She loves me not. Is this a good figure? No, not especially. Not particularly at all. In fact, the one thing it does, the face spinning gimmick, is a bit janky and, to be perfectly honest, doesn't actually work that well. The only sort of limbs where they could have some points of articulation, it kind of just goes up and down. And I think we can all agree that that alt mode is nothing. But what were they meant to do? What can you do with, like, Egbert over here? He could have just been a spaceship or something, I suppose, or maybe been a bigger deal as a jail. It would be really nice if this fastened on. But after all this time, we finally have a Quintesson Judge. And for that reason alone, he had to make it onto the list. Rosebud. 8th place might be a little bit surprising to people who've been long-time viewers of the channel, for no other reason than I don't think I've put up a Studio Series review before. But anyway, 8th place goes to Studio Series Bumblebee Blitzwing. What is not to love about this figure? It looks like the character is supposed to from the movie. The transformation is pretty cool. There's a little bit of kibble and stuff on the underside. But for how good the robot mode is, for how posable, for the shapes he can throw, it's just literally pretty much every position that you put this figure in and then, you know, hang back and be like, yeah, I'm doing a cool pan with my head. He's gonna look dope. He just feels so much like Starscream. It's kind of a shame really that the Studio Series Bumblebee Starscream that we are getting seems to be so heavily based off of this guy without capturing anything that makes this Blitzwing figure one of the standout figures of this year, in my opinion. I think he looks cool. I think he looks very dynamic. I think he looks powerful. But I think he looks really, really dynamic. I almost think this toy helps make the character more memorable. And is that not what it's all about? That kind of meow, content, merchandise, synergy. So I had a lot of fun with this next entry. And based on the views that it got over the sort of Christmas Eve, Christmas 48 hours, at least 2,500 people out there got one for Christmas. I feel like that makes that a fairly hot ticket item, akin to Turbo Man. Oh, Howard, these cookies. Put the cookie down! It's not your cookie! In 7th place we have Turbo Man.
This is Optimus Prime.
Sorry, Optimus Prime. How can you not love that? How can you not love the fact that Optimus Prime will talk back to you small soldier style? I don't think anyone told you didn't get #1 spot. Right, even just gimmicks aside, him just by himself, that's a really cool big Optimus Prime. And he's posable. In my initial review, blink, I thought he didn't have ankle tilts, but that's because they were just super stiff. So he's even got ankle tilts. So you can get this Optimus to throw some pretty cool shapes. He's got some fantastic cartoony lines. The matte finish of these figures works really well. And it's a gimmick that enhances play rather than hindering it, which can't be said a lot of the time. I know what can get said a lot of the time. The 6th spot goes to a mouthy little bugger, the Alicon. When I saw the pictures and I saw how the arms transform and the kind of configuration they kept showing the legs in, you know, the long legs that looks friggin' ridiculous and doesn't even make sense with all the joints that he has. Anyway, I wasn't digging it in the stock images and things like that. It just felt really lazy. But once you get him in hand, it's a whole other story. There's just something about it. It's so toyetic. Just that chomper. It's so satisfying making him just bite down on unsuspecting bots. If you are lucky enough to be in a position where you can pick up more than one, you can do the army building as Primus intended. And if you throw a few Sharkticons in there as well, now that we've got the Quintesson, that's actually not a bad little fighting force. Especially if you've been able to pick up the Quintesson Pit of Judgment, then you've got 2 Quintessons. In my case now I've got 3 Alicons. I got a couple of the Cyberverse Sharkticons, a couple of the Titans Returns, or yeah, I think it was Titans Returns Sharkticons.
Baby, you got a stew going.
So all up now, that's not a bad looking little Quintesson army, if I do say so myself. The back 5 came together quite easily. That wasn't too hard to pick who I wanted where. The front 5, this front end, the top 5, that was a little more difficult. And even like up until filming, I've been like, but I think I've got it locked down now. These are 5 figures that I think are the cream of the crop this year when it comes to Transformers offerings. I can't wait to see what other people think about my list and where different figures came in for them. Be sure to like and subscribe and let me know what you're thinking down below. Let's get into it, shall we? This position goes to a figure that is actually a repaint of a Siege mold, but I think in this repaint it has surpassed its original offering in every conceivable way, to the point where I now feel like the Netflix War for Cybertron Megatron is the definitive Megatron of my collection. It fixed a few of the quibbles and some of the issues with his head and his ankles. I don't know how, but it did. I feel like the metallic dry brush silver just brings out so much of what makes Megatron Megatron. This figure, I feel like, has the clout and gravitas to be able to punch down and throw down with like Optimuses and Shockwaves and whoever else you need him to punch in the face and remind why he leads the Decepticons. If I could change one thing about this figure, it'd be the black marks. That's the only element of those sort of the first wave of the Netflix Siege figures that didn't quite land for me. Anyone who's watched my stuff before knows I'm a big fan of the battle damage, and I think this is probably what it was always intended to be. I feel like this is the height of the battle damage. He just has all the punching power and menacing might that you want your Megatron to have. Whereas before the flat grey of the Siege version, when you had him out on display, he just kind of receded into the background. This Megatron just makes for such like a steely bastion, just the driving force and center point of your Decepticon invasion. Now, I've had to pull back a bit, which should give you a slight inkling as to who gets the 4th place position. Scorponok. Now, the advent of the Titan class is something to be celebrated wholeheartedly, and each new Titan release is something incredibly exciting. I look forward to the "here's a piece of it" tease that you always get at like Toy Fair, I think it is. We do know for next year now that it's the Arc, which is the first one I'm a little bit like, that's not a Titan, there's other Titans you could do, right? Do Sky Gary or whatever his name is. It's probably not Sky Gary, maybe it's Sky Carry. Maybe it is Sky Gary. But Scorponok, this year's offering, he's just, all of his proportions are super on point, his detailing, his functionality. I don't think there's anything that I don't like about this figure. All of his proportions are so on point. He's really well articulated, he's really well balanced. Don't you find with a lot of the other Titans, cool as they may be, like there's always something a little bit off with the proportions, with the balance, like something you just change ever so slightly if you were able. I find with Scorponok, there's nothing I'd really change. I mean, it's not the most super functional base mode, but they never really are they? Even just the fact that the head can look up and down ever so slightly. Like, what a huge boon to this scale. You'd have to assume that the Arc and any other Titans that come out from this point are going to have that head tilty thing, because it just adds so much more gravitas to it. Right? The play appeal is strong with this one. Let's get Megatron back in here.
No. No! Line.
Now, just quickly before we get into the top 3, I wanted to take a moment just for a couple of honorable mentions, a couple of figures that were really close and I really, really liked this year, but for whatever reason, just didn't quite make the list. The Quintesson Judge Pack. Between the diorama, the getting the extra repaints, the effort in the remolds, that whole set was just phenomenal. And like, it was probably the purchase that I was maybe the most eagerly anticipating this year, had the most hype for me and for a lot of people I imagine around it. The reason it didn't make it to the top 10 is because it's lots of figures rather than just kind of the one. And no particular one in that, you know what I mean? It just didn't quite feel like it sort of qualified. Just quickly as well, a shout out to Elita 1. She is phenomenal. This figure totally would have made it to the list if it wasn't for the abysmal alt mode. And lastly, the Netflix Earthrise Soundwave. This has been quite a hot property this year, especially in the back end with people trying to find them. I'm still so grateful to Hasbro Australia and to Kmart Australia for being able to get some of these to us down here in the Southern Hemisphere. He would have made the list, but there's part of me that still likes the Siege version a little bit more, or at least, if not more, the same for different reasons. So with that in mind, that's why Soundwave didn't make the list, but it was tough. Alright, well, with that now out of the way, let's get on to the big three. This was really tough, but I had to really reflect on... God, I'm making it sound so serious. These are the three toys I like the most this year. In third place, His Magnificence himself, Skylynx. Commander class has been a great thing. Jetfire was awesome. I don't play with him that much. I kind of just have him set up there. He looks awesome. It's a fantastic figure. But just Jetfire's scale always kind of irked me a little bit. It was weird. They sort of like didn't really reference it enough, do enough with it. I don't know. The Jetfire scale situation just makes me vaguely uncomfortable. Skylynx is a whole other story. I had so much fun doing the video for this figure. And I really, really like the amount of extra functionality they managed to add with the launch pad, seeing as, you know, it doesn't have the electronics. The dragon head works really well for me. It's surprisingly expressive somehow, which is, you know, kudos. The molding is awesome. The broadened chest I really like. It's incredibly well articulated. The reason it's not higher on this year's list is mine has a couple of QC issues. This wing barely stays on anytime you move it, and it flops around a lot as well, which is disappointing. I think it's weird still. I said it in my actual purpose Skylynx video, but I still think it's weird that this section here wasn't notched so that you could get some more dramatic lines with the tail. And as cool as the treads are on the bottom, thunder tanky they may be, I do think some more distinct claws would have gone a long way with this figure. Quibbles aside, he is just a fantastic addition to any collection. I love the weirder stuff of G1 so much. Like, anyone who's watched much of the channel knows I am just a sucker for a beast mode. So being able to have the two beasts, the combo dragon with this figure is just hitting all the right notes for me. Beautiful. So the number 2 figure is a fantastic figure by any measure. This figure is particularly near and dear to me because I managed to break news on the Earthrise box art and packaging art. If you Google Earthrise box art, you'll still see that first picture with my tasty creamy thighs. So that figure of course was Earthrise Optimus Prime. But I'm a little conflicted. So this spot goes to this particular mold. They both have their advantages and disadvantages, something that I'll cover at length in a purpose video for this guy in Soundwave that's coming out soon. But it just, to me, is now, it's the definitive Optimus Prime figure. I don't think we've ever had a better G1 mainline Optimus Prime figure. Like, this is one of those toys that makes you be like, man, this really is just mini masterpiece, isn't it? The sculpting is beautiful, articulation is beautiful. The fact that he's got his matrix in there. I know some people get butthurt about the butt wheels, but you know, stuff's got to go somewhere, and it's incredibly clean from the front. I'm fiddling with this version at the moment because I'm a sucker for a Battle Master. Chop, chop, shield, shield, chop, chop, shield, shield. Right, I think they both deserve to be in this spot because the differences are sort of fairly arbitrary, really. This is just such a good Optimus Prime figure. I feel like when you were a kid and you were playing with your G1 Optimus and you'd been watching the show, somewhere in your mind's eye, this is what you were actually playing with. Now we live in an age of wonder and technology, where they're able to capture things like this so accurately. And as someone who's been a Transformers fan for, like, I don't know, all of their life essentially, and this figure coming along and just so perfectly hitting the Chug Generations kind of mainline Optimus Prime point, I'm so grateful that this figure exists. It's just fantastic. And I am grateful you exist. I do have to give the edge to the Netflix version, ever so slightly. Just because I personally am a fan of Dark Navy Prime. Would have been cool if they'd gone for a slightly lighter thigh, and if this had had yellow eyes, that might have been enough to push him to number 1. So there's only one spot left. The figure that takes out the cream of the crop right at the top, never eat a pig because a pig is a cop, or better yet a Terminator like Arnold Schwarzenegger figure, is a real standout for me this year. When you've been collecting and into something like Transformers for like most of your life, so 30 odd years, like, you know, I know enough to know I don't know everything, but it's not very often that there's big surprises anymore. So when this figure like got announced and dropped, I actually hadn't heard of him as a character. And so as, you know, a 34-year-old fan, that was really exciting for me. It meant I had like some research to do, there was some more content I could explore. And the other auspicious element is the fact that this is the first time that this version of this character has been fully realized in the Plastic Fantastic. The number 1 spot goes to Generation Select's Super Megatron. There is just so much to like about this figure, right? I know that he should be starting with, you know, his shoulders up and knees out, but I personally feel like it makes for a bigger, cooler transformation if they start tucked away. It also gives you some slightly cleaner lines for just, you know, a cool looking Megatron. There's just so many design elements here that have been hit on in other things that I didn't know about. So I had no idea the longevity of the Transformers manga that like ran in their TV guide, which is really, really cool. And there's some content. I haven't been able to find a copy of like the collected translated volumes, but I really want to get them because new Transformers content is always an exceptionally exciting occasion. Also, like, you know, when I had to go back and look into who he was and what his deal was and why he transformed and things like that, it was just so cool to see that Transformers Animated had taken design cues from this version of Megatron in terms of his like helm and stuff, like the sort of longer, more drawn down helmet. I also feel like it works quite well as like a IDW-esque kind of Megatron, like that super broad silhouette. I do have a fully purpose review of this figure coming out, but I'll just quickly smash him into his powered up mode so you can get a little taste of how truly awesome he is. Is that not just phenomenal? Even the fact that he's like headband changes. I love a powered up armored mode, anything like that. And it sounds like from what I've been able to glean so far, the way that transpires in the anime is like super like, this isn't even my final form, Goku. But probably cooler than Frieza because it's Megatron. That's just great. And then he even has, just like Lucifer, I've got a devil face. A true face detective. Right, this little devil face, I'm honestly not sure if that has base, like it must have some kind of basis in the manga, but from the shapes of it, I also feel like I assume The Last Night referenced this with their Megatron. It's just, I feel so excited that there's this huge section of Transformers that's had so many like roll-on effects that I'm not fully aware of. It's like, when he's out in this mode as well, does that not give you sort of, you know, vague airs of Transformers Energon Megatron? God, it is a rich tapestry, this franchise we love, is it not? You know, so kind of in a lot of ways, I almost feel like this figure has become an embodiment of everything that I love about this franchise. I just wanted to take this time to say thank you to everyone who watches, everyone who subscribes, who comments on my videos. The amount of support and kind of the way the fandom's gotten around it all has been really nice. When I was first getting into this, you know, you think of YouTube comments and the internet as general as being quite a negative space, but everyone's shown so much support. And I just wanted to say that I'm super grateful and I hope you keep enjoying content into 2021. Triangle facts. So there you have it, that's my top 10 of 2020. I would love to hear what you all thought about this video. Do you think I should do more top lists? Because in my noodle I've got cooking a couple of others that I was thinking of doing. I had a lot of fun with this video. I can see doing more, if that's something people would like to see. How do these figures rack up against your top 10 of the year? Would you have changed the order? Are there any figures that you think should have been on the list, who shouldn't have been on the list? Go ahead, subscribe, like, comment, subscribe again, tell your friends, tell your mum. See you on the next one. Thor, Thor, hammer time, Thor.